My name is Edie Burnett. My generation grew up during the polio epidemic in the 40s and 50s. So I have personal recollections during that time. But I have some information to share with you. Polio became one of the most serious communicable diseases among children by the 1950s. The virus was poliomyelitis, a highly contagious disease. Initial symptoms resembled those of the flu, but for some, polio affected the brain and the spinal cord, leading to paralysis and even death. Iron lungs kept patients alive. Iron lungs were mechanical respirators using alternating air pressure to simulate breathing. Literally, the device forced air in and out of paralyzed chest muscles. The patient's body was enclosed in the canister-like machine. Some hospitals established special units filled with iron lungs. American families were terrified, including those in Canton and Haywood County. With the source of the virus unknown, parents kept their children at home and avoided all outside contact. Cleanliness was stressed. Extreme heat was considered a threat. And much like today's efforts to combat the coronavirus, social distancing was important. Swimming pools, movie theaters, summer camps were closed. Events drawing large crowds like Canton's Labor Day celebration were postponed or canceled. School opening was delayed. Neighborhoods were sprayed with the highly toxic insecticide DDT because both flies and mosquitoes were suspected to be carriers. And that carried its own problems with that highly toxic material. The Asheville Orthopedic Hospital was established in 1939 to care for crippled children. Later named Tom's Rehabilitation Hospital, it expanded into the care of poliomyelitis and eventually into rehabilitation for children and adults, which continues as its current mission. According to one source, Asheville Orthopedic Hospital emerged as the only facility in western North Carolina that would take patients, mostly children, who were stricken by polio. Pat Long, a senior at Canton High School, became the face of polio in Canton, although he was not the only person who was affected. The disease paralyzed his throat, arms, and chest muscles. He could not speak. While hospitalized at Asheville Orthopedic Hospital, he completed educational requirements to receive his high school diploma. School personnel arranged a small ceremony in order to award him his diploma in a meaningful way. The local media wrote, "No other person has gained nationwide recognition such has been accorded Pat Long." Pat was a personal friend. We went individually and in small groups to visit him. The sound of that iron lung breathing for him is a haunting memory. His speech was halting. He talked on the exhale, paused on the inhale, waiting to gather enough breath to speak again. The result was interrupted sentences. Eventually, he could live outside the iron lung, but he never regained full use of his body. He did not live a long life, but his mother, a teacher, was dedicated to caring for him. Other classmates were affected, and they still require leg braces in order to walk, or they move with a limp. Polio drives were instituted. The hope was for Canton to raise $7,500, and that was the town's portion of a projected $15,000 for Haywood County. Now, other people have recorded their recollections. We will read their quotes and let them speak to you. Jean Littlejohn said, "I have a lot of memories. We could not go out of our yard. We could wave and yell at each other, but were confined at home. No pool, movies, and so forth. But as I recall, everyone still went to church and our fathers went to work. We were not allowed to even play in the creeks or branches during that time period. Trucks came through our neighborhood spraying both sides of the road. Don't know what it was, but it may have been DDT for all we know. I do remember Pat Long and visited him on several occasions. My husband, who did not live here, got polio. He was paralyzed from his waist down. His treatment was a shot of penicillin. After some time, the feeling came back in his legs and he was able to walk. But this may be part of his current leg issues. Post-polio syndrome, it is called. I read an article that so many people in the Hickory area got polio, and many are having problems in later life. From Bill Mason, I remember it must have been in the 1940s. I was walking to town to go to a movie on Saturday, and a Canton policeman stopped me and said, "Billy Mason, no one under 12 years old can be in town until the quarantine is lifted." I stayed home the rest of the summer.
Okay. In the summers, late summers of the late 40s, 49, 50, things were very tense in our communities. Polio was spreading through the summer. Everything was closed. People were very reluctant to go out. We knew that people had polio. We weren't too sure exactly how they contracted it. So it was a time of uncertainty and nervousness. In the summer of 1950, I was in college in Bristol, Tennessee, and my sweetheart lived in Pulaski, Virginia, and I decided I wanted to go see her. So I set about hitchhiking one day to go from Bristol to Pulaski, and I got a ride, and the fella took me to the south city limits of Wytheville, Virginia, and said, "This is as far as I go." He put me out there, and so I started walking through the town of Wytheville, going from the south city limits to the north city limits so I could continue hitchhiking to Pulaski. And I had gone just a little ways when I realized there was a great big police car pulling up beside me. And the policeman says, "Sonny, where are you going?" And I said, "Well, sir, I'm trying to get to the north side of town so I can hitchhike on to Pulaski." He said, "Get in." So I got in, and he took me to the north city limits of Wytheville and said, "Get out now, and I don't want to ever see you in this town again." And I wanted to be sure that he never did see me in that town again. So I got on out of there, hitchhiked on to Pulaski, visited with Joy that afternoon, and that evening I started hitchhiking back to Bristol. But this time I was pretty careful so that when I got a ride, the first thing I did was to ask the person if he was going to go where he was going to go. And he said, "I'm going to be going to Bristol." I said, "Hot dog, we don't have to stop in Wytheville then, so that'll be good. I'll take a ride." And so I took a ride, and we went right on through Wytheville in the car, and I didn't have to get out and see that policeman again. So people were very nervous. Towns were very nervous, and if you were a stranger in town, you better be able to account for what you were doing there, and you weren't welcome. It was a tense time. Thank you.
Norma Jean Henson talked about her sister. She said, "My sister Frances had polio in 1950. Dr. Roy Moore and my mother were quick to suspect this, and she was rushed to Asheville Orthopedic Hospital. The hardest part was not seeing her for a few months. Parents were allowed only every now and then. A sign was put on our front door. We were to stay in and everyone else to stay out. Only our relatives that had been with us all the time would still play with us. Polio did weaken my sister's immune system and affected her back, but she was not changed in any other way. She passed away in 2011. I also remember seeing Pat Long, said Margaret T. Paxton. It was scary to know he had to live like that. I remember one whole summer being quarantined. We could not go anywhere or play with friends. I visited Pat Long when he was in the Iron Lung, said Robin Welty. He mowed the lawn for our neighbor, and it started raining, and he stepped in the gutter when it was full of water. That is what I was told about how they thought he may have contracted it. 2 other neighbors contracted polio, and it impacted their gaits, and they had to wear leg braces. But John Bottoms and Anna Catherine Bell both survived and thrived. Mary Glantz talked about her husband Buddy, who was in my graduating class. Buddy had a mild case of polio as a young boy. It left him with one leg shorter than the other and a slight curvature of his spine. His parents said they took him to a special hospital in Gastonia for physical therapy and treatment. Betty was never a very strong student strong person for the rest of his life. My uncle, Max Q. Rogers, developed polio after returning home from serving in World War II. And my dad, T. Hugh Rogers, bought the first iron lung for Haywood County Hospital. He did this so Max could be closer home. They lived in Clyde. This from Mary Rogers Singleton. Another, I remember Pat Long being in an iron lung. Seems like it was 1945 or 46. Grace and Wallace Davis had a daughter who died of polio in 1944, Judy Rogers. Anita Charm would wake in the morning and hesitate and carefully move her arms and legs to be certain that she was not paralyzed. David Philmont, who lives in Waynesville, I remember the quarantine that summer. All summer in your own yard and no classmates. They had dime boards in Waynesville to collect monies. Just drop your change, even a dime would be okay. Polly Jordan Leatherwood. And finally, I remember my dad, Yoder Clark, and Cecil and Gertrude Young all working on fundraisers for polio. Maybe for singing collections or taking up singing conventions and taking up collections. I was very young, but I remember it. Nancy Clark McDermott. As you can see, polio had a severe effect on people of my generation. It was very frightening, just as coronavirus is affecting everyone today.